I am going to get us started and I'll introduce myself. And then Maria, I know I saw you just a minute ago, but if you want to be on standby so I can have you introduce yourself to start, and then we'll come back to you for your portion of the presentation. My name is Erin Patterson. I'm Director of Education Initiatives with Schoolhouse Connection. I oversee our K-12 and early childhood strategy and practical assistance work. I spend a lot of time these days on our early childhood piece because there's a lot of opportunity there to make sure we are increasing the enrollment of young children experiencing homelessness in high quality early learning programs. And so my job right now today is just to give a quick overview of why that's so important, some of the barriers that families experience, and then I do have some Wisconsin specific data that I'm excited to share with you all. And then that's going to lead right into Maria's portion. So Maria, if you're there, can you say a quick hello? And she might have slipped off. I know she was here just a minute ago. I will go ahead and get us rolling, and then hopefully she can hop back on and jump in for her portion. So I know you all are familiar with Schoolhouse Connection. If by chance you're joining from an early childhood program and weren't here for the first half of the conference or aren't familiar with Schoolhouse, I'll just say really quickly, we are a national nonprofit advocacy organization, and we are committed to overcoming homelessness through education. And as you've probably picked up, we work from early childhood through K-12 and higher education. We are active in federal and state policy and advocacy, as well as practical assistance to districts and early childhood programs. And as you just heard, the jewel in our crown is our network of young scholars that we support who have themselves experienced homelessness. And Maria, I see you jump back on. I was wondering if you could say a quick hello, and then I'll go through my slides and turn it over to you.
Yes, hello, I'm Maria Keatsman. I'm with Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners. Forgive me for hopping off. I needed to join the other room quickly, so I had host screen capabilities, but I am back now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay. So here's what I'm hoping for my slides up front and some of the things that you're able to take away with you today. One, I just want to level set and make sure we're all on the same page and saying some things out loud about the impacts of homelessness on young children, the barriers that families experience. I'll share some data with you all and sort of connect some dots about what that data tells us about some opportunities, particularly to bridge the K-12 and early childhood systems in Wisconsin. And then I'm hoping what we've planned is that that'll be a really smooth transition over to Maria, who is the expert on early childhood in Wisconsin and can talk more about those specific strategies, the landscape, and everything that you all need to know to actually apply this into your work. Feel free to use the chat throughout to ask any questions. We have some pauses throughout to make sure we're getting to those questions. And then we also want to make sure we're leaving space for you all to share your strategies and best practices as well. So just to review our definition of McKinney-Vento, again, if you are maybe coming from an early childhood program or in a role where you might not apply and make these determinations regularly, just to level set, homelessness is defined as children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And you can see here the categories of homelessness that are included in McKinney-Vento. We like to emphasize the doubled up portion because, as you heard earlier, families who are experiencing homelessness make up about 75% of the K-12 student population. This is particularly important when we think about the development of young children. Families who are living in doubled up situations, families who are living in shelters, families who are experiencing homelessness, not only lack that fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, but those young children are exposed to dangerous environmental situations, dangerous social and emotional situations, during the stage of life that is most critical for development. I think we've all heard that about 90% of brain development happens in the first couple years of life. And so it's super important to make sure that we have our children in environments that are physically supportive, emotionally supportive, and in places where parents and adult caregivers can be proactive in their development. But for families experiencing homelessness, this is much more difficult. We hear anecdotes a lot at Schoolhouse from young mothers experiencing homelessness, for example, who will say, you know, I was able to get a spot in the shelter, but I refused to take my infant to a shelter because I was scared. I didn't want my infant's playtime to be on a shelter floor where I'm not sure how often they clean it. There were no toys. There was no room for me to breastfeed at the shelter, no privacy. So there's a lot of complications when you get into families with younger children experiencing homelessness, trying to navigate their options. And this is why a lot of young parents put themselves in doubled up situations because of lack of other alternative. But those doubled up situations are also extremely vulnerable and can often be dangerous. Parents may stay with abusive or exploitive people or partners in their life. They sometimes trade sex in order to have a place to stay so that they know there is a roof over their head. So being aware of these circumstances and complications that our infants and toddlers and children under 6 are experiencing is really important. Just to say a word about unaccompanied homeless youth, because there is an overlap here. We see, and this is our definition of unaccompanied youth, you probably saw this in the earlier session, but this bottom part, a lot of young people become unaccompanied and homeless because of pregnancy. We know that in high school, a young person experiencing homelessness is 10 times more likely to become or have gotten someone pregnant. And this might often force them into a homeless situation. And so again, being aware of all the ways in which this intersects. So there might be circumstances in which you are not only working with a young high schooler experiencing homelessness, but they become pregnant or they have gotten someone pregnant. And so now there's an additional generation to think about. And we know that the cycle of homelessness can sometimes be multi-generational. And so again, being aware of all these factors and circumstances becomes really important in the work. A little bit more nationally before I get into the Wisconsin data, we know that there are about 1.3 million babies, toddlers, and young children under age 6 who experience homelessness across the US. That's from 2018 and 19. That is the last year for which that particular data point is available because that's from some state profiles that the US Department of Education conducts. They will be updating those at the end of this year, and so we'll have a fresh statistic there. I don't have to spell it out for you, but the impacts of COVID have probably increased the prevalence of homelessness among families, including those with young children. There at the bottom, you can see that 44% of young women who are age 18 to 25 are current or expectant parents to over 1.1 million young children. So again, this cyclical nature, unfortunately, of homelessness becomes really important, especially when we know that education can overcome homelessness. And so how are we approaching these families in a way that supports not just the young child, but the parent in case they need opportunities to complete their education? I do want to point out, because we so often don't give them our due diligence, 18% of young men experiencing homelessness are also current or expectant parents to over 1.1 million young children. And I think that's worth saying because I have been inspired by the increase in attention we've been paying to young men who are expectant or current fathers, as well as young women. And I think that's really important when we think about this generational cycle. Again, just to drive this point home, infancy is the period of life when a person is most at risk of living in a homeless shelter. That's from HUD's annual report to Congress. At Schoolhouse, we always say homelessness is more than a housing problem. It has many systemic drivers and complex causes and far-reaching consequences for child development. And in fact, families experiencing homelessness face multiple barriers to accessing high-quality early childhood programs that can not only provide that developmental support for their child, but can unlock access to other supports for the family, including housing. Some additional data that is new this year, 15.4% of infants and toddlers live in crowded housing. And again, I don't have to spell it out for you, but those circumstances are known to jeopardize child development. And in fact, 2.9%, about 3% of babies and toddlers have moved 3 or more times since birth. Hispanic, American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black babies have a higher incidence of living in crowded housing. And then low income babies are nearly 3 times more likely to live in crowded housing. So again, going back to our definition of impedimento, when we say crowded, we mean it does not meet that fixed, regular, and adequate criteria. So this is a lot of children, babies, and toddlers who are experiencing homelessness. Again, just driving these points home, homelessness and infancy has been found to be associated with delays in language, delays in literacy, delays in social emotional development, and it has long-term consequences. And in fact, we know that the impacts of homelessness stick around even when a family has received permanent housing. There was research that just came out last year that showed in a group of young children who had experienced homelessness up to 2 years before, they had had permanent housing for 2 years, they were still demonstrating the traumatic effects of their experience of homelessness. And it shows up in our schools, it shows up in our early childhood programs. It's maybe the young child who gets antsy when it's time to go for the day because they have learned the behavior of not being certain where they will go after school or being certain where they will stay that night. And so it manifests in ways that our educators can do so much to be aware of. Thinking long-term. So you think about a 3-year-old who is experiencing homelessness, but this can have long-term consequences. For our high schoolers, the graduation rate for those experiencing homelessness is 68%. That's compared to 85% for all students. Homelessness is the lowest, is the factor that has the lowest graduation rate across all student subgroups that we have data for. So even when we think about that low income economically disadvantaged, it's the experience of homelessness that has more dramatic impacts on our students. Like I mentioned, high school students who experience homelessness are 10 times more likely to become pregnant or get someone pregnant. And again, the delays in development, physical, social, emotional challenges, and long-term trauma. So I'm going to go into some data now. Schoolhouse Connection did an analysis of 20 states. Wisconsin was one of those states. We were able to come up with estimates for each state of the total population of young children experiencing homelessness, including subset of birth to 3-year-olds, and then their enrollment rates in various programs. This is just a little data methodology. We never put numbers in front of you without telling you how we got those numbers. It's important to note here that part of the equation for estimating early childhood homelessness is to use your first grade identification percentage. So I just want to drive home the point here that it's so critical to have those identification practices in place in elementary school, because that what will determine your outreach efforts in the early years as well, having that accurate count, as accurate as possible. You can see here the various estimates that we pulled from to get our estimates for our 20 states. So, and then, like I mentioned, we also pulled the enrollment data we have enrollment data for Head Start, and then we also have enrollment data for children birth to 3 in early Head Start, childcare, and home visiting. And so that's what I want to show you for Wisconsin. And I'll just note here that for the home visiting piece, we were only able to get parents as teachers, but those of you who work in the early childhood space, you know there are about 14 other models that we could pull from, some of which are in Wisconsin, some are not. And so this is an ongoing part of our work at Schoolhouse, is to tighten up the data that is available and that is able to be reported and collected. In Wisconsin, there are 16,537 children ages birth to 6 who are experiencing homelessness. 16,537 birth to 6 experiencing homelessness. In terms of their enrollment in early childhood programs, 17% total are enrolled in Head Start or early Head Start. That's 392 in early Head Start. 624 birth to 3-year-olds are enrolled in a childcare program, and 77 are in parents as teachers home visiting. What that means is that 83% of children aged birth to 6 who are experiencing homelessness are not enrolled in an early learning program in Wisconsin. And I will tell you, Wisconsin's about average for the rest of the country. There are significantly low identification and enrollment rates in early childhood programs of children experiencing homelessness. And so that's why one of our missions at Schoolhouse is to increase that enrollment rate, because like we mentioned, having access to high quality early childhood programs can unlock so many more spheres of support for families who are experiencing homelessness beyond what is good developmentally for their child or children. So a couple key takeaways from this data. First, the most obvious, infants, toddlers, children, and families experiencing homelessness are significantly under-enrolled in early childhood programs. And in just a minute, when I hand it off to Maria, she's going to tell you more about what the early childhood landscape looks like in Wisconsin and how to bridge some of this, because we know that liaisons are often the linchpin and the key to success for so much, including early childhood, because you come into contact as a liaison with students who have younger siblings who could qualify for these programs. The question is, how do we get them there? And so I'm excited that Maria is going to talk more about that. There's also a possibility that some of these children, infants, and toddlers who are experiencing homelessness are actually enrolled in an early childhood program, but they've not yet been identified. And the same lessons that we hear in the K-12 space apply to the early childhood space. All the reasons you're familiar with. Maybe the family's afraid that Child Protective Services or immigration will get involved. Maybe they don't understand that they do qualify as homeless because they're in that doubled up category. Whatever the reason, it's so important to identify those families so that those supports can be unlocked. And then lastly, we need more data and better reporting mechanisms. And there are a couple ways that we can do that. But I'm really excited to get to Maria now to share more about what this looks like for you all in Wisconsin. I will encourage you to keep putting your questions in the chat. We're going to stop at the end to address your questions, and I will turn it over to you, Maria.
Thank you. Would you be so kind to stop sharing, and then it won't let me click it quite yet.
Yep, sorry, I'm trying to find my button here. Got it. Sorry, that took me longer than it should have.
No, that's no problem. Okay, bear with me while I get mine on here. Okay, well, as I said earlier, I am Maria Keatsman, and I am with Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners. A little bit about my role at Early Childhood Collaborating Partners. Our Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners. I am the Southern Region Early Childhood Outreach Specialist. You can see our map on there. But statewide, I have a content focus on educating youth experiencing homelessness and child find. So I work throughout the state in that area. Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners, we have a vision that all children will be healthy, nurtured, safe, and successful. And a lot of what we do, we are the collaborating partners. So we want to collaborate and share updates, resources, initiatives, data, and research. And we really work to strengthen those cross-sector relationships in early childhood. And so today, because we are Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners, and that's what we want to do, it's going to be all about collaborating. And that's really what our focus is on in early childhood to bridge those gaps. So often in early childhood and in all areas of education and programming, it can feel like different parties are in different islands. So parents and families and caregivers may feel like they're on an island. They're experiencing homelessness and trying to connect and find those resources, but to connect and find them, they might feel like they're just trying to keep their head afloat. They're saying it feels like I'm drowning when you are so overwhelmed in your current situation that you're in. Schools, I have on here learning centers, and I'm going to include Head Start in both this category and on the other island, because Head Starts in Wisconsin sometimes are connected with school districts. They have some strong partnerships that way, and in other areas, they are more community-based. They have different community-based practices. So I didn't list them out on here, but they kind of fit into two islands, if that makes sense. Learning centers I have that can include early preschool outside of those public 4K and community 4Ks, child care centers that may identify as an early learning center, and school districts and schools, LEAs, you may have heard that term quite often today, would be another term we can put in there. And we have another island of birth to 3, home visiting and community programs. And so in order to help connect and help make those connections, like Erin said, we want to, I'm going to get cheesy for a second, we want to build those bridges. So I added some cheesy bridges there. And of course, today we are going to spend some time collaborating together and building those bridges together. When we talk about early childhood and all education, but we really want to look at what is developmentally appropriate. And so in building those partnerships, we're looking at guideline 2 from developmentally appropriate practices. And so it says right in there, that second guideline, that we want to engage in reciprocal partnerships. And on all of these slides, you may see, not on all, but on many, you may see links on there. So these slides are on Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction's website. So the resources and the links that are on here are available to you. So I'm going to start on that first island of parents, families, caregivers. Now, we sometimes see the term parent and families when we're talking about children and their support networks, but we want to recognize families and people raising children come in all different types of different, pardon my words, but different styles. And so this includes grandparents, guardians, any other type of family structure, or outside of family, people raising children. And we want to recognize that, using that term parents to encompass all of that, our children's primary and most important caregivers. And that is coming from Wisconsin Model Early Learning Standards. And those are linked right on there too. And the reason we really want to focus on families first is they are going to be able to tell us what they need. What are the needs of the child that you are working with? And I like this quote so much. If we care about promoting the long-term healthy development of children, we need to care deeply about their parents, as they have the greatest impact on their child's development. We can't just skip the parents. So working in early childhood, supporting families, supporting parents, is supporting that child. We're working with the whole family, home, group of people considered family together. So one thing that's really important when we're talking with families is to use multiple communication methods. And this is extra important when we're looking at homelessness, because we understand that there can often be different resource and communication barriers. So I added a few things on here just to kind of keep in mind as you're talking with families, that sometimes families may only have Meta, or formerly known as Facebook messaging, if phone plans are not available. Or in Wisconsin, we have some pretty significant dead zones for wireless carriers. Sometimes Wi-Fi only, texting, or emails, kind of those Wi-Fi options may be your only technological options with Wi-Fi. Notes sent home are another option. Memos posted throughout the environment. So one thing I did while I worked in childcare is I would hang a sign from the doorway that hung right about like mid-chest to face height, depending on how tall a person was, with a memo saying upcoming things, different notes that way, so that you literally had to walk into it when you came into the room. But it also was a very one-way communication style. So what kind of methods are you using that are reciprocal so that families can also communicate back? Or sending notes home with other home visiting programs, any other programs that you know are working with families. One of the things I want to highlight on this too, specifically around the Facebook messaging, is that when families use Facebook messaging primarily for their communication, is to think about what your school or agency is doing to protect your own identity. And if you have any type of agency account set up so that you are not using your own personal social media for that. So these are just a few ideas that I have on here, but we want to collaborate. So I know that out in the field and that throughout this Zoom room, you likely have wonderful ideas and things that you're using, apps, different programs. So right here is Slido. So if this works like it should, then I'll have a question where you can share different types of communication styles that you are finding to be reciprocal and working well with the families and communities that you're working with. So to join, you can go ahead and take your phone and scan that QR code and it should come up. You can also join at slido.com, and then there will be a spot where you put in our Slido code, which is EHCY-homelessness for early childhood homelessness. When you're on there, this question should come up now that I'm on it. So if you would be so kind to share, if you have things that are working well for your area in Wisconsin, I see 4 people are typing, so it must be working. They should start popping up. Texting, yes. Class Dojo. And Dojo is an app that I've just become familiar with, and there are free options on there. They do send a lot of ads on there. So that is one thing just to be cognizant of when you're using that app, is that it will try to keep getting people to buy their paid app. There are ways to use it that you don't need to buy it. So just to make sure that you're communicating that fee is not needed when you're working with families. Google Voice for texting. Parent Square, I'm not familiar with Parent Square. So as you're reading these, if you have, I'm gonna leave it up to pen and paper near you. I believe that when this is done, this information will stay on slido.com. But if not, I'll just take some time where you can write down any ideas that you haven't seen and you want to check into. I also, like I see on their email and follow up with a parent phone call, to be double checking to see you might be using one type of communication, and double check and see, is that working? And ask parents, what is working for you? I sent you an email last week. Is that the best way to communicate? What do you prefer? Some other options to make it reciprocal too is just to kind of get old school. If you have families and parents coming into your space, can you leave Post-it notes out? Maybe a message box where they can leave messages either with their name, or if they want to leave some without sharing, leave it anonymously. And I also see trusted on there. Communication, trust is so needed. Okay, moving on. I'm going to go on to our next island a little bit. I'm going to be moving a little fast because I want to hopefully leave some more time at the end for us all too. So school collaboration. I have on here a directory of homelessness liaisons and how you can find your Head Start program. So what we want to do in creating those bridges when we're thinking about schools is, I think, using the term transition is what we often use with schools. Transitioning children from early childhood into our 4K programs, into sometimes 4K as part really embedded in districts, and sometimes it's a little bit separate, so into kindergarten and beyond. And how do we communicate with even within our district between liaisons and the rest of our school? I did make sure too that we have 4K and 4K community programs. Sometimes our 4K programs are out throughout the community, and what does that communication look like? So how are we communicating regularly? As Karen said earlier, that we want to have school staff regularly communicating with their partners, both in school and outside. That regular communication is what's going to help it go easily. And I won't read this whole thing, it is linked on here, but just a little extra bit for our liaisons is that we talk so often about, when we talk about McKinney-Vento, we talk about enrollment and we talk about transportation and pieces like that. But when it comes to early childhood, specifically when you have maybe families with younger students who are not yet enrolled in your district, that there still is a requirement to make those referrals and make those connections, and to be providing those service outside of the schools as well as for those students enrolled too. So our next question, if you go back to that Slido again, I wanted to just get a gauge on our communities. So I'm going to have if homelessness liaisons would just let the rest of the group answer this one, since I didn't leave a spot for you. Just to see, do you know who your local homelessness liaisons are? You communicating? So where do you fall on here? Do you know them but you haven't connected? Some are still coming in here. So those of you who do not know your local homelessness liaisons in your district, I definitely encourage you to pull up these slides afterwards and pull up who your local homelessness liaison is and make those connections. And then liaisons, this is a good gauge to see what other areas you can connect to. So it looks like we have about 80% of the group knows their homelessness liaisons in their area and is connected with them, which is really good. This is a good gauge of this group anyway, and it's showing that you are working hard and connecting. Moving on to community collaborations, again, continuing to build that bridge. And so what I want to do here is I am going to just kind of highlight a few areas that I would think of as more hubs when we're communicating and creating those partnerships. And I did want to just share this piece here too, because it's something that comes up when we're talking about homelessness and family dynamics. So using those ARP EHCY funds, those are funds through the American Rescue Plan, available through schools. At the beginning, I think Christine said 8 million were spread out throughout Wisconsin at the beginning of the year for McKinney-Vento. Funds are not able to be used on parents or family members who are not enrolled in your district. They are only able to be used for students, however, that are receiving McKinney-Vento services. However, family and other members can still incidentally benefit. So again, if we're looking at creating resources for the whole family that are supporting children, we can still make those referrals and we can still make sure that we're supporting children by supporting them as a family together. We just cannot use those funds specifically for parents or younger children not enrolled in the school. I'm going to go back just really quick too, because this link down here at the bottom, providing wraparound services, that is a great resource that answers a lot of questions on different wraparound services and the rules around them, what you can and cannot do. So childcare resource and referral agencies, we call these often CCR&Rs. So CCR&Rs, I've got on there where you can find your local ones. They're local agencies that provide a variety of services, more than listed for sure. And they make referrals to quality childcare, and they have information on local supports to prevent homelessness and different trainings. So going back to what Erin said, of making a goal of increasing that enrollment and even just increasing that identification. When we are referring to CCR&Rs, there are different programs throughout the state that may be grant funded, regional programs. It looks a little different throughout the area as far as what services are available and what can be provided. So connecting in with your local CCR&R will let you know what's available to you for childcare and different programs that are available to prevent homelessness and those different supports. Continuum of cares, these are often referred to as COCs. So these are groups of providers that get together and in the goal of preventing and providing services for those experiencing homelessness and preventing homelessness. They are a HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development group, and they also have requirements to work with their local liaisons in schools. And one of the big areas that you will find support through your COCs is in shelters around your area, knowing what shelters, what warming houses, those types of things are in your area, so that you can connect in with those, make referrals as needed. Earlier, Karen was talking about where do you put your posters, posters for services, your McKinney mental services. And when you're doing outreach in your schools, where are you putting those things? And I said schools, but I'm also going to go whole early childhood. I'm also going to recognize that we have people not in schools that are coming from infant mental health, childcare settings, other types of early childhood programming. And so where are you advertising those programs that you are doing? And so one area that's doing really great in this is in Appleton. Those programs are being sent out to the shelters in the area. So what they send out to families, hey, come check out this program. This is what we have, to send that out to our domestic abuse, our warming houses, our other places throughout Wisconsin that people would benefit to know that information as well. So finding and connecting into those, your COCs are going to be a great place. They also have different supports and different things, like all of Wisconsin, happening regionally that may be specific to the area of Wisconsin where you are. Family resource centers. I added 2 links, I believe. My bar is right in the middle on here for finding those. Yes. Family resource centers offer support to families and parents of children in their early childhood years. So this is a great area when you're looking at home visiting programs and infant mental health to connect in with programs like this. And again, what is available in your region? There are different tools and resources for strengthening families. Sometimes there are different types of parenting groups happening at with family resource centers, or that they can share information about that are regionally happening. You can connect in with them and find out what's happening in your region. So again, what I'm hoping is that in sharing these, that you are going to leave here with just places to go and say, okay, here's where we need to connect. I know I have these needs in our area, and here are some places that you can go and try to see what is happening and how to connect and how to make yourself known in your programs and your supports that you do. I also added on here our Wisconsin Human Service agencies. And I'm going to add a little bit more on here that I think came to me as we have been meeting today, is that I have had quite a bit of experience working with Wisconsin Human Services. I have been a mental health crisis worker, and in the past I also worked in children's long-term family support, which is supported through our human services. So I sometimes forget that there can be quite a lot of stigma just in hearing the word human services. And so Azra really helped remind me of that in her sharing today too. So just to be cognizant of that as you are connecting with your human service agency, as you are referring families to different programs in human services, that there can sometimes be a stigma because Child Protective Services is often under that human service umbrella. Outside of that, though, there are so many different programs that have opportunity for partnership. So while I worked as a mental health crisis worker, we were often the first kind of point of contact when somebody was experiencing homelessness. And this kind of goes back to that island at the beginning that I talked about, that sometimes families are going through a change. Something happened, maybe it was a financial change, a natural disaster, whatever it was that that caused the homelessness to start. And as they are on that island trying to figure it out, they're looking for resources, and sometimes mental health crisis was that first piece. So people would contact us and say, hey, I need support, I need services, what do I do? And when I was a crisis worker, I would sometimes connect in with school social workers and say, hey, just so you know, this child was in a mental health crisis, can you connect back in with them tomorrow? But I did not say, hey, they're also experiencing homelessness, simply because at that time I did not know about homelessness liaisons at districts. And so I missed a great opportunity to get those kids connected, get families connected, and get those programs started earlier. Human service agencies also have different community resources available, and those are often, again, kind of region specific. There are different programs throughout the state. Mental health referral information. So if somebody came, when I was a crisis worker, came in and said, hey, I'm looking for some mental health services, I had a whole sheet on our county of everybody that we knew that was providing mental health services. I could send it to them and it would say the different programs they offered, and it was a great, just here's a quick resource for you. And there are other things like the CCS program, Comprehensive Community Support. You may have students that their families or they themselves are receiving CCS services. That's a mental health services that takes a comprehensive, holistic approach to mental health. And so there may be community and family goals. They may be working with a mentor after school or after their childcare program, and they have different goals that together you could be working on. And so there is a lot of connections that can be made there. And what I see is this being an area that still has so much stigma. So like Karen said, to have frequent communication, you're going to know those different pieces, you're going to be able to break that stigma because you're going to know what supports are offered and how to share it that way. Yeah, so there's a lot that can be done there as well. I have on here, find your county, so you can find your human services there too to see what they offer. So our next slide, if you pull that back out again, those are just some hubs that are great places to start and can connect you in throughout Wisconsin. But we know that throughout Wisconsin, there are great partnerships happening already. So if you would be so kind, if you have some great partnerships happening, to share what they are, and it also leaves room to share your name. If you are willing to share your name, it may give the opportunity where in a chat, you can direct contact that person and say, hey, would you share your email? I would like to know more about how you got this partnership happening, to share what is working for you in your community. I also will say that I know that there are different learning styles on here. So while I have Slido on here, feel free also to unmute if that is your preferred way to If Slido is not for you and you want to use the chat, that works as well too. Okay. I see the NEWCAP and school district. EC County Council, is that Early Childhood County Council? Early Childhood Work Group in Dane County. Yes, I have heard so many wonderful things about the Early Childhood Homelessness Work Group in Dane County. And I believe that you have cross-sector shelters, schools, different resources, infant mental health, so many different programs coming together.
That's correct.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to share any more about that, Janie, and how you how that model goes and how you connect in?
Yeah, quick. It came about because of our McKinney-Vento work. So I work in the schools, and I didn't know those connections. So we pulled this group together because the schools didn't have a connection with our early childhood community. So we meet monthly, and we talk about issues of homelessness. And our biggest challenge right now is getting our child care centers to ask the question about homelessness so that we're trying to do some real data collection. And we have a big panel tomorrow night going on about the child care crisis and how do we help our vulnerable families connect to child care and what can do. So we just do all kinds of different things in the community about awareness and understanding with working with our youngest kids.
Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so important to get the data on there. Another thing that is really important too in identification of childcare programs too, of who is experiencing homelessness, is it really helps with that transition piece. So if we know if a child care center or program has identified a child as experiencing homelessness, and there is partnership and communication happening, when that child then enters the school system, and you have that partnership, we can know right away. We can be sharing that, I mean, with why am I not thinking of it? The signed forms where you can share information, of course, following FERPA and HIPAA laws, that if you have that partnership and you're working together, that you can have that identification piece coming easier into the school, at the start of 4K, or if that's after school wraparound childcare services, that you can get that identification piece because that child has been identified somewhere else. You're working together in that child's best interest and that family's best interest. And so we don't have to wait for schools, especially in thinking 4K in those early years or where children are new to a school, for families to share that information or districts to find it when it's not shared easily, if that makes sense. Joining forces for families in Dane County, Stand Down Madison. Working with children's hospitals, what a great place to start. Working with them too. I work with Health and Human Services and CPS. I work in targeted safety practices at Parents Place in Waukesha. Yes. Dairyland Housing Coalition. Thank you so much for sharing all these. I'm going to peek at our chat quick. Are there any questions in here? Thank you. There are lots of resources that are being shared in the chat. So go ahead and look at those as well. Oops. So then this is an area just now for it's on Slido again, where you can ask questions. And And so we have kind of a question and answer time. It's on Slido here, but again, do what works best for you. If you would like to share different things that are working in your area, questions you have, how to make different connections, by Slido, by chat, by unmuting, whatever feels most comfortable to you. And I should also say, Erin, I wasn't sure if there are any kind of pieces as we've gone through here and as people have shared that are connecting into you that you would also like to touch on too.
Yeah, happy to. This has been so great, especially that last Slido showing the collaborations that are already happening. That's so important for us to know, and especially for you all to see what's possible. I just want to acknowledge, Danny put something in the chat earlier that says part of the challenge is not only how we get children and families connected to a program, but what supports there are to help them maintain and sustain childcare, transportation, attendance, et cetera. And I so appreciate that point. And I would love to open it up during this time to hear more from you all about how you're able to provide those resources. But just a reminder that there are provisions in childcare and Head Start and pre-K that not only align the definition of homelessness with the McKinney-Vento Act, but allow for some flexibilities and waivers that can remove some of those barriers so that families do have an easier time accessing and attending. I'm going to go ahead and name that there is no satisfactory answer right now to the transportation challenge. And if I had a penny for every time someone said, how can we do better at transportation, I would have enough money to fix the transportation problem. So I just want to acknowledge that that is such a challenge, especially in the early years, where it is not guaranteed in the same way that a child is entitled to transportation to their early learning center of origin, like they are in the K-12 system for school of origin. And I know many of you can attest, even on the K-12 side, budgets are tight and that is not easy to coordinate. But some of the other things, for example, one of the biggest barriers we hear for families trying to enroll a young child in a childcare or Head Start program is those programs require immunizations, they require birth certificates, they require, in some cases in childcare, they might require proof that a parent is working. And those are things that families experiencing homelessness sometimes don't have. And they're trying to get their child enrolled in childcare so that they can go get those things like a living sustainable wage. So the federal childcare regulations, for example, realize that. And so I put the link to the schoolhouse summary of those regulations in the chat. Someone earlier was saying, right now you're trying to help childcare understand how to ask about homelessness. And one first step is making sure every licensed childcare provider knows that homelessness includes doubled up. I talk to many people in the early childhood space who do not know that and don't understand that. But it also means what lessons can our early childhood partners learn from the way that K-12 enrollment forms are done, for example. Take the word homeless off of your enrollment questionnaires in childcare and in Head Start. Ask instead, in the last 30 days, which of the following situations has applied to you? And then ask, I've stayed in a motel. I have stayed with someone else because I didn't have anywhere else to stay. So you're taking the word homelessness out of it. You're also hopefully supporting your childcare folks and your Head Start programs and your pre-K places to proactively help families understand you are offering support and help. You are not going to report them to CPS. You are not going to call the police. This is a safe space and this is confidential. And the reason you're asking is because you have resources to offer to them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that part of the chat.
I do want to share one piece, kind of going back to the piece on transportation that I did hear a very creative idea. And the reason I want to share it is because of one of the resources I shared based on wraparound services. So at a recent lunchtime live, forgive me, Clara, if I said that one wrong, the webinars that DPI puts on around homelessness once a month at lunchtime, somebody had shared in that group that they partnered with a local church that was nearby for transportation. So they were able to get volunteers and use funds to pay for them. When working with churches, that can be an area where you wonder, how does that work? So in that wraparound service resource in there too, it does talk about working with places that have religious beliefs attached to them, such as places of worship too. The barriers are even greater for families who have children who have special needs. In addition, being aware of reading, writing levels when filling out forms. Definitely, you want to make sure that your forms are easily understood. It is easy to add a lot of terminology, acronyms, different things like that. And so when you're looking at your forms, you want to think, if somebody has absolutely no idea about what I'm asking them, are they able to, what information I am asking them to give, are they able to understand it too? If they know nothing about McKinney-Vento, about our district, can they look at it and know what it is that I'm asking them? I know I was often taught keep things at like a 3rd or 4th grade reading level when you are working with the general public, so that you are accommodating different reading levels as well.
Maria, I'll also jump in and just add that I so appreciate that comment, and it really underscores the need to coordinate across multiple systems, including, don't forget, your early intervention IDA Part C folks. This is one example we hear in a lot of other states, that lack of communication and coordination can often withhold resources from young children experiencing homelessness who might be identified with learning differences in particular, or developmental needs. And that's, again, so critical in those early years. So trying to practice that mindset of what other systems and people and places might this child come into contact with that I should also be connecting with to the extent that I can. And I think there's a hand raised too. I think Bailey, I don't know if you want to come off mute or put something in the chat.
Yeah, so I was just curious, in our district, we have, within our elementary school, there's a local Head Start uses like a room here. So they're housed here, but they're not a part of our district. Like, they're not in our information system or anything like that. Their students are not enrolled through us. Some of them are in the 4K program, but like the 3K program are not. So in terms of like McKinney-Vento and like students who are eligible to like, that we should be identifying and reaching out to, we typically do not identify or reach out to or provide services for the students who are only in Head Start and not in our information system. But I know with something that I had seen previous, if they have an older sibling that's identified as homeless, would we then be, are we like responsible for providing transportation and other things for them to get to Head Start as well, if we're aware that they're in an early childhood program?
I have a quick starting point for that question, but then would defer to maybe Clara and Maria from the state perspective. I will just say when working, that's a common question we get is, does this Head Start program qualify for McKinney-Vento services? The short answer is, and I'm not clear based on what you've shared, if the Head Start program is a grantee through the school district, then yes, they are considered part of the school district as the preschool. And so McKinney-Vento would apply. Sometimes Head Starts, I will say about 85% of Head Start programs in this country do not fall into that category. It's more common that Head Start is not a grantee through the district. And so it's harder to apply McKinney-Vento. I'm not sure if in the example you shared, if that means the Head Start program is a grantee or if they just have an MOU with the district to share space. So that's where I would start. Yeah, that's where I would start. And then in terms, so that's going to determine then your answer to the question about identification and transportation. Now, Head Start, regardless of how they receive their grant, they also are required to identify and report the number of children enrolled who are experiencing homelessness. So even if they're not a grantee through the school district, you could have an MOU for data sharing in place, and that could be one starting point to help those identification numbers once children get to kindergarten or first grade. And like we said earlier, transportation is also problematic. It has less to do with the older sibling and more to do with where Head Start gets their money from, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'll add on that piece is to look at those two resources on finding your Head Start, because in that, and you probably know since you are connecting with them, and to reach out to them and talk about what that relationship is and how they are funded. And the other piece would be, again, that those funds can be used for the students enrolled through your district that are identified as experiencing homelessness under McKinney-Vento, and the funds will go towards them. So an area that I would kind of explain how families could incidentally benefit from that, as that kind of quotes or piece stated, would not be in the transportation piece, but more so if you were looking at mental health services for a family, and if you were making referrals or bringing in, I know somebody had said in here that they bring in, I think it was JFF, is that the therapy program, I believe. They bring in different therapists into their school. So if you are contracting with therapists in support of a child, and that therapist makes some connections with the family, or gives in their work connects in with the family and shares different goals and programs that end up supporting the family as a whole, they can incidentally benefit that way. I know I got on a tangent, but I hope that answered your question as well a little bit more too.
I put a link in here just to add a little bit here, because we do on our DPI page have a little bit of information about preschool and early childhood. I do want to emphasize that kind of to separate this from the funding part of that question, preschool is included in the definition of a school of origin. So for example, you would need to make sure that a preschool student is receiving transportation to and from their school of origin. And also we really do encourage districts to find ways to identify students or children, young children who are the siblings of another student or students that were identified, like you had just mentioned. So if there is another student in elementary school and the parent says, oh, we have another non-school age student at home, that is an instance where you would want to identify that child as well.
Okay, so, okay. I think I have that. Clara, I might be following up with you with some further questions.
And Bailey, I'll put another link in the chat. We actually had to develop a flow chart just for this question, because it is true that McKinney-Vento includes preschool, but further defines that preschool means that it is funded through the LEA. And so that's why I say start with finding out if the Head Start is a grantee through the LEA. And if so, then great, you're set and those services are available and eligible. If it's not, it becomes a little more tricky. So I'll put that link in the chat too.
More specific in Wisconsin, looking at preschool under the McKinney-Vento, because we have 4K, public 4K, those are included. I believe you said the person is in a 3-year-old program through Head Start, is that correct? Which makes it a little bit different, because it is a 3-year-old program, where if we're looking at 4K, that goes back to Clara's point of the what is in the best interest of that child. See, I see another question. Any flexible enrollments for childcare, especially since transportation is not available to stay in location? A move means redoing the paperwork and documentation. So I'm hoping I understand your question, right? You're wondering what kind of flexible programming there is for childcare. And so where I would go for questions with childcare is to your childcare resource and referrals, because they will have different information about childcare programs and supports available in your area and different programs available. I'm not sure if there is something more specific in that question.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So one of the challenges is because we can't provide transportation or there isn't transportation, families often will say, well, I'll just change childcare centers, right? But they don't talk to each other with the same documentation, the same programming, anything. So often, like with after-school programs, if they're in our after-school programs in our schools, they can move from one after-school program to another after-school program because they share the same type of enrollment information. They can just transfer that. And this is a conversation we've been trying to have about how can we make it easier for that transition between childcare programs so that information at one childcare can easily move to another childcare so they don't have to redo everything again. I just don't know if you were aware of that happening anywhere and what that might look like. I don't know. It's just out of the box thinking.
No, I like your out of the box thinking for sure. You're right. There's not, that I know of, smooth pieces in place like we have for schools when children are moving schools. What I would say is just that's where those partnerships really come in and having those releases of information. So if you know that a child is going to be moving childcare programs, is to get that release of information. That was the term I was missing earlier when I was saying making sure we are meeting our FERPA and our HIPAA rules and laws. If we have those shared, and then we can talk with each other and kind of help with those pieces. And so that's an area where if you are working with a student in a school, and you know that they're going to be moving childcare, and you have a partnership with the current childcare, you can say, hey, let's get some releases information shared by the family caregiver guardian system and those childcare so that they can connect and get that information shared and that you have connection with the new one as well. Because you're right, it is a lot of paperwork and documentation to redo, and so having those releases of information where you can share it does help a little. There's always that beginning enrollment paperwork anywhere though.
Thanks. That's great ideas.
Not to belabor the Head Start question, but I do want to emphasize that even if the Head Start program is not a grantee through the district, Head Start has their own set of performance standards with regard to children experiencing homelessness. And so even if they can't provide transportation, they are required by law In fact, it's the early childhood program that comes closest to the McKinney-Vento requirements at the K-12 level. They're required to identify, to serve, and to remove barriers to access for those families experiencing homelessness. So I didn't want to end on a downer of, oh, they're not a preschool and so it doesn't matter. I do want to encourage you, as you're working with your Head Start and childcare and other early childhood programs, they also have their own sets of standards and regulations related to serving children and families experiencing homelessness. And Maria, I see that our room is on the countdown, so I'll leave it to you for last words.
We're on the countdown, so thank you so much for joining. For more information and to sign up for our listservs and to stay connected with Wisconsin Early Childhood Collaborating Partners, our website is there. I also have my information on here as well. So if there are things that are coming up, questions and things that you want to help process, you want to get connected in your community, I may not know the answer, but I definitely want to be a resource